about codependency today. And as always, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to give you my personal view of when I was codependent on my psychologist, Dr. Richard Geist. Now, codependency, you can look it up, but I'm going to give you my definition of what it is. It's when you have one person who's very needy, which was me, the patient, and you have another person who is an enabler, who needs someone to need them. Now, in both cases of this, there's psychological reasonings why one person is in this role and the other person is in their role. Okay, so there was a problem with my psychologist, why he needed to be needed so much that he fostered that. See, a psychologist, like a parent, should foster independence because they're in the role of a parent. They're in a power role. That is why they say that you cannot have a sexual affair or even a friendship or a business dealing with a psychologist because they're like a parent. You know, they're in a power role. In fact, if you do have a sexual relationship in some states with your psychologist, they can be imprisoned. It's a criminal offense. They can go to jail. Just like, because they see it as incest. Just like a parent having sex with their child. Because the child cannot give consent. Well, the patient cannot give consent because the patient is not in an equal role with their therapist. The patient is much regressed like a child because they go in and they're vulnerable and they spill their heart and soul, and the therapist tells you nothing about his life. You see the power differentiation there? So, getting back to codependency. I desperately needed a rescue hero in my life at that time. The two men I loved the most, my father just died, and my son Alex got stricken down by a deadly disease, meningitis, that ate away his brain. Now, he didn't die, he survived, but his mind died, meaning he lost everything in his mind. It was wiped out. So at 27, he's like a 2-year-old. So I lost the two men that I loved the most in my life. And my cousin came in at that time and stole my inheritance because I trusted him. Both my parents died back to back, and I trusted him with some money to help me because I wasn't in my right frame of mind. My son was in the hospital with brain damage, and my father and mother died within 3 months apart. So I wasn't thinking clearly. So he swooped in, and came in and pretended to help me, and he stole $35,000 from me at that time when I was going through all that. So I desperately needed someone to lean on. I had no friends because the friends I had only leaned on me. They only called me when they were in trouble. They didn't want to listen to my problems. I listened to their problems. I didn't have anyone. I was an only child. So I desperately needed someone. And this man, Dr. Geist, was 22 years older than me. So he was like in a parental role anyway because he's 22 years older. And he just came in and offered me all like 5 hours a week therapy for free. He said I could call him 24/7. I could call him on his vacation. I could even go to his vacation home in Maine. He said, come to Maine, come to Maine. He gave me the house number of where he was, of his house in Maine. Can you believe that? He wrote me emails every day, phone calls. So he was an enabler. He enabled me to become dependent on him. And there was some lack in him. I didn't know it at the time, of course. Hindsight's always 20/20. There was some lack in him that made him need that. You know, I made him need someone like me, weak and vulnerable, to look up to him, to need him, to be so dependent on him. There was something lacking in his psyche and his psychology. Now, what happens with this, it seems like awesome in the beginning when you're so dependent and someone is enabling you. They're giving you everything you want, like that, like a little kid, right? If mommy lets me stay up all night and eat candy, I don't have to eat my vegetables. I don't have to do my homework. I can stay up and watch cartoons or movies, whatever I want all night. Isn't mommy great? Oh, wow, she's the best parent. But let's say they're divorced and I go over daddy's. I can't do that at daddy's. I can't stay up all night. Daddy makes me eat my vegetables. I can't eat candy at daddy's. Daddy's no fun. I don't like daddy. I want mommy, right? Now the kid is kind of confused because in my mind, I loved it. I was eating this up, all this attention from this Harvard psychologist. I mean, he was gorgeous at the time, you know, tall and thin, and he had like, when he smiled, his whole face lit up the room and his eyes sparkled, and the way he looked at me like this, right? I ate that up like candy. But part of me, I went to the board in the first year because I thought, this is over the top. This doesn't seem right. It seems too good to be true. Like, the adult in me was questioning this. Like, this isn't right. But the child in me said, shut up! I'm having fun! You know, like the two sides of you, like the little angel on one side and the little devil on the other side. Like the voice of reason on one side and the you know, the spoiled child on the other side saying, you shouldn't, this isn't good. What he's doing isn't good for you. But the child is saying, shut up. I'm having a ball. So I went to the board. I wrote a complaint, but then I rescinded it because I knew, like he said, if you go forward that complaint, you'll lose all the candy. You'll lose me and lose all the attention. 5 hours a week, constant emailing, constant phone calls. And you don't have anyone else to turn to except me. I didn't have any friends or sisters or anyone that I could call, right? So I couldn't do it. I had to rescind it. I told them it was a mistake. They don't care. They don't want to go through the red tape, right? If someone is going to withdraw a complaint, that's great in their eyes. Less work for them. So I tried. I mean, the adult in me saw that it was wrong. And that was only the first attempt to go to the board. There was a second attempt, too, when he pulled it all away from me. Because, you see, these enablers, they can't keep enabling over and over and over again. At some point, they get burnt out. At some point, it's no fun any longer. At some point, the person that they made dependent on them gets to be too demanding, gets to be too needy, gets to be a real tedious, you know, chore for them. So at some point, he didn't think it was fun anymore. What he enabled, now he didn't want. But this is it. In therapy, a therapist needs to stay consistent. So what your rules are up front, in the beginning, you should follow through. He didn't do that. He got tired and worn out. It was no longer fun anymore when I called him up in the middle of the night and his wife was woken up by me. And his wife started complaining about me. She didn't like it. It wasn't fun. So these 2 years of him doing that, all of a sudden, boom, he stopped. I couldn't sit in his lap anymore. I couldn't call him up anymore. He didn't email me anymore. He cut back all my hours. All of a sudden, it's no longer fun. It's a chore. All of a sudden, he says to me, you're too demanding. You want too much attention. Right? But who set me up for that? He did. So it was all on him. That's what happens with codependency. Both people lose. Because you cannot really function. It's not a functioning relationship like that. Right? I'm not a child, and he's not my parent. And therapy is to make the patient be able to function on their own. Same with a parent and a child. You want your child to be able to go out in the world and make their own living, right? Not stay at home and you take care of them because you're going to get old one day, right? And then what are they going to do? You know what this same therapist said to me? He said, I don't know how my patients are going to survive when I retire. Can you believe that? Now, that was a big red flag. I don't know how my patients are going to survive when I retire. That means all his patients, like me, were codependent. See? He was enabling them to be very dependent on him. After all, this guy charged $300 an hour. Well, 50 minutes. 300 for 15 minutes. So, by having patients dependent on him, he gets to pad his wallet. $300 for 15 minutes. And stroke his ego. All these damsels in distress, they need me. Oh my God, they can't live without me. What are they going to do when I retire? How are they going to live? You see? So, it's good for the ego, right? Because this gives him a big, big head. How are these people going to survive without me? And pads their wallet, because patients were coming to him not once a week, not twice a week, but 4 times a week. Do the math. 4 times a week for $300 each time they came. Okay? That's $1,200, right? For one patient. $1,200, okay, a week for one patient. This guy had like 40 patients. Do the math. He was a millionaire, okay? He was eating this up like candy. And all he had to do was sit there. This is what he did. He fell asleep. I kid you not. He fell asleep during some sessions. Not every session. But he'd just sit there and go, imagine $300 and you sit there and you go, And he'd ask the same question over and over. Why do you drink? And I'd give him the same answer because drinking stops the thinking. When I drink, I don't have to think about all my troubles. And he'd ask the same question and I'd give him the same answer. That's all he'd do. And nothing more. And he'd just sit there and get $300. It was bizarre. But this is what codependency is. So how do you know if you're in a codependent relationship? It's very unhealthy, either side. Whether you're the one that's needy and relying on the person, or the person who's enabling you to do that, who needs all this attention, who needs you to need them. It's a very unhealthy relationship. Do not get into a situation like that. You don't want to be either party, okay? You don't want to be the person in need, and you don't want to be the enabler, the person allowing you to be in need. Have clear boundaries. Number 1 rule in therapy and in personal relationships. Clear, concise, persistent boundaries. And I mean consistent. People need consistencies. Like children. They need to know what to expect. That's why the therapy hour is always the same time, the same day, every week, right? That's a consistency. If you have therapy, let's say Wednesday at 2 o'clock, it's every Wednesday at 2 o'clock. It's consistent. It isn't like sometimes it's Tuesday at 10. Sometimes it's Friday at 9. No. You have a clear time and a clear day for your therapy. But this psychologist wasn't consistent at all. Sometimes, in the beginning, he would allow endless phone calls. Then you couldn't call him. Even when I called him, when my son was brutally beaten and left a message, he didn't call me. When I asked him the next session, why didn't you call me? I was in the middle of a crisis. I wanted to take my son out at the place he was brutally beaten, and my husband said, we can't bring him home. He can't live with us. He's severely handicapped. He's an invalid. So we were fighting, and I didn't know what to do because, I wanted to do one thing, take him out of there, and my husband wanted to do another thing, keep him there. So what do you do in a situation like that? We're both his guardians. So I was in the middle of a severe crisis, and I called Dr. Geist, and he completely ignored me after telling me, if you need me, call me and leave a message. I will call you back. This is a week ago he told me this, all right? So he set the stage for it. I was just going by what he said. I call him, leaving like half dozen messages. The next session, I said, why didn't you call me back? This is what happened. I explained it. And he goes, I was busy. I said, well, why didn't you call me back the next day? I was tied up. And he was yelling this. Can you imagine after what I'd been through? And he's screaming his head off at me. So, you know, if you don't want a patient calling you during a crisis, you make that clear. You say to that patient, I'm not available during a crisis. You call 911 or you go to someone else. You have to set the stage in every relationship. You are the one that determines how someone treats you. Remember that. Don't ever blame someone else. I blame him because he was in a position of power. It was not an equal relationship. I was the vulnerable patient. That's why I blame him, because he was a doctor who took an oath to do no harm. He had all this supposedly training from Harvard, years and years of residency, right? And training and supervision. I'm talking about in a regular relationship, like with a boyfriend or a husband or a girlfriend or at work with a coworker. You are the one who sets the stage how people treat you. Remember that. Except in a position of power, like with a child, with a parent, or with a psychologist and a patient. That's always different, because that's not a relationship of equals. But if you see something like that happening in a therapy, get out. Okay? As much as you might love that therapist feeding you the candy, get out fast. Run. Learn from me. Okay? I turned into an alcoholic. I never had an alcohol problem in my life.